Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Childish Gambino called Awaken, My Love. You know, it feels like I've got a complicated relationship with Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino. Hell, I get the feeling that a lot of critics do. Most because it's so damn rare to see an artist leap so fully formed and relentlessly talented across genres and indeed entire mediums. Whether or not you know him from his comedy sketches, to his writing work on 30 Rock, to the cult classic Community, which absolutely rules, to his soon-to-be classic show Atlanta, which also totally rules, he's a man of extraordinary talent. That's before we get to his stand-up work or his work as a musician and songwriter and rapper. But if I'm also being brutally honest here, I feel like I should like a lot more of his music than I do. The odd blend of styles and production, most outside of his mixtapes, which are done in-house with producer Ludwig Göransson, present in his music are often juxtaposed with lyrics that often feel intensely personal or eclectic. There's a defined artistic style and voice that's always been present here that will then veer off in unexpected directions made from a pastiche of indie music, southern hip-hop, and bizarre pop culture references, all amidst a creative mind that can be incredibly ambitious but also painfully self-aware. Re-listening to his debut album Camp and his much-lauded follow-up Because the Internet will give you plenty of evidence why Childish Gambino is a compelling presence behind the microphone as a charismatic rapper and singer, but between the cartoonish exaggerations that occasionally slide toward campiness, often masking deeper wells of rage and self-loathing, and a genuine feeling of earnestness that can either hit transcendence or deeply felt awkwardness, he comes across as the sort of precocious yet driven creator who's not afraid to aim high, overshare, hit big, and miss hard. That's inspiring. That's powerful stuff. Something that, yeah, I can relate to on a certain level as another creator. I just wish that his aesthetic and craftsmanship of his sound and narratives just worked better for me. And that was my big concern going into Awaken, My Love. Most because while I admired his lead-off singles, I didn't really love the sound or some of the artistic choices associated with them. But then again, I was only seeing fragments of the story. I had to hope that the whole project, his shortest in some time, would have the focus and clarity to really work for me. So, was I right? Well, okay. I gotta be honest here, this album was a really hard one to crack. Reviewing any Childish Gambino project is always a heavily involved affair, but this one was a doozy, especially considering he almost completely left hip-hop behind for a blend of funk, soul, blues rock, and even R&B. The sort of genre bending that left me frustrated and confused with the lead-off singles, and a little bit nervous that I would not be able to like his newest album as much as I wanted to. And then, about a dozen listens in, it clicked, thanks to a coincidental re-listen to another album that's not even in the same genre, and yet shares a stunning number of parallels with this. Now, it's not as good as that other record. In fact, there's a part of me that's still not quite sure where I fall in this album as a whole. It's a bizarre listen that I'm fairly certain is good, but not great. But you know what? I understand this, and with that knowledge, I can appreciate the album a hell of a lot more, and that's saying something. So let's start off with Childish Gambino himself. If you were fond of his more restrained singing voices that cropped up on previous albums, well, the most you're gonna see of that are moments, most prominently on Stand Tall, because the contortions he puts his voice through are something to behold. His howling on Me and Your Mama and Riot is raw to the point of sounding almost painful. His almost comical, exaggerated emphasis on zombies, complete with auto-tune, and then you add in the auto-tuned mumble croon of California and the languid crooning of Terrified, and that's not counting the points like the Funkadelic-inspired multi-tracking of the hook of Have Some Love, which contrasts with his oddly swallowed vocals on the verses, the blend of croaking howls, squeals, twisted sneers, and warping overdubs on Boogieman, and the obvious Sly and the Family Stone influence on Baby Boy. It is one hell of a performance, and that's before he swamps his voice in reverb, shifts it up a semitone for an entire song on Redbone, and yeah, I still don't really like that, and adds all sorts of warping filters and effects to match a female backing choir that doesn't really seem to fall as soulful, gospel, or symphonic. It's a little weird there. It's defiantly what you would otherwise expect from a Childish Gambino project in a lot of his lyrics, now mirrored in his delivery. Wild, eccentric, with a few too many points going for comic exaggeration rather than relying on the words themselves to deliver the message. It's not exactly a record that seems to have a lot of subtlety, which, yeah, are points against it. So okay, do the lyrics support him here? Well, at first glimpse is a bit of an odd mix, not exactly helped by Childish Gambino's tragic comic persona that seems to warp and contort support throughout these songs. And while the abandonment of rap means he doesn't have the same stream of cheesy punchlines, there are some writing choices that border on camp at best. I actually really like Boogey Man, with Gambino embracing elements of black stereotypes, witch doctors and gangsters and the boogeyman, the darkness, in order to protect someone, all with the uncomfortable truth in the second verse, so as long as people fear him, he'll never truly be free of those stereotypes. But then Zombies runs into awkward territory, as obvious parallels to those who would eat off your fame with no real brain, and the zombie voices are played by Corey Fall. Yeah, this is where we step into Childish Gambino's warped relationships with women. And while you can tell the framing isn't exactly intended to flatter him, you get songs like California, where the girl wants to move to California to market her pseudo-fame that came off of Vine or World Star, and he's kind of dismissive of it. Or then Terrified, where he embodies the creeping fears on Redbone into a lot more literal territory, as he seems to stalk this girl to wind her back into his web. Until the outro from the girl, sung by J.D. McCrary, where she seems scared at first, but the words that she says are, "You can't hide from me." So okay, what's the underlying fear that underscores and underlines so much of this album? Well, that only snapped into focus when I listened to nothing else but A Sailor's Guide to Earth by Sturgill Simpson, one of the best albums of this year, but a country album that also ventured into other genres like rock and soul, and just like Awaken My Love, it's all about fatherhood. That's the main central theme. What you might not know is that Donald Glover recently had a baby with his girlfriend earlier this year, and that snaps songs like Me and Your Mama into a different focus, with the your now referring to that of his infant son. It gives the black empowerment subtext an emotional core that works on Riot and Have Some Love. It gives the fear on Baby Boy, where he knows that his relationship with the mother will probably fade, but he doesn't want to lose his son along the way. It gives him some real dramatic weight, and it gives a message of hope that ends off the record on Stand Tall some greater strength. Furthermore, it also places some of the more cartoonish elements in some more context. To a child's point of view, the broad strokes would likely have that deeper resonance regardless, from the nursery box melodies and cooing backing vocals to the deeper cackle that might as well be imported from a Disney villain movie. But for as much as that can excuse a lot, it doesn't excuse my biggest frustration with this album, and that's the production. I've always thought that Ludwig Göransson's arrangements and tonal choices were good in terms of the composition, but lack a certain amount of texture and grit. And yeah, if we're looking for my biggest issue with this album, it would be that. And what's exasperating is that, again, it's not entirely consistent. I dug how the organ, bass, and percussion was balanced on Have Some Love and Riot, but as soon as we got to Boogey Man, I'm left feeling that if that guitar didn't feel so weedy and had a little bit more grit and distortion and volume to balance out the rest of the funk tones and the bass and the cleaner vocals, a great song, it could have been truly amazing. It's a similar case for Zombies, which intentionally plays a little bit sillier with the watery pianos and guitar, the major chords in the composition, and the cheesy synths, but it could have played for real 80s R&B horror tones like something off of Thriller or Somebody's Watching Me, and it would have absolutely killed for me. Hell, Terrified does something very similar to that with the low tones, the drippy effects, the ghostly synths, the weedy organ, the flattened guitar, and the xylophone, and it works far better. I like the song more. Hell, even though that vocal filter still kind of drives me crazy, I think I've finally come around on Redbone courtesy of some great funk tightness in the bass line, and it's a solid hook. California has similar problems to Zombies. The sandy reggae vibe and good bass line is undercut by some of the goofier effects, the farty synth line, the gutless pan flute, and the guitar that's got no real depth or bite. Baby Boy is similarly frustrating. I like the bass line, I like the melody and the composition, but that organ is not blended in a way so it doesn't come across chintzy as hell, which it totally does, which gets kind of frustrating when you have actual depth and balance with the harmonized vocals and guitar on the very next song. It's a basic interlude, but really it works really well. Or with the very gentle funk of the guitars on Stand Tall, it transitions into woodwinds, which could have had organic presence if Childish Gambino didn't pile on the auto-tune to then transition into some blocky synths before a really abrupt ending. But then again, all this kind of makes sense coming from Childish Gambino. While this album doesn't feel as fragmented and as scattershot as previous albums, the slightly chaotic and off-kilter edge is as present as always, and leads to a record that I'm happy I understand, even if aesthetic choices just don't kind of click with me. As such, I'm giving this album a solid 7 out of 10, but I'm not really sure how I can recommend this, because if you're expecting hip-hop going in, you're not gonna get it. It's broad, it's occasionally cartoonish, very occasionally hits some potent emotional moments, and yet I can't help but feel that Childish Gambino is still getting in his own way a little bit too much. Still, it's a fascinating listen, and he's so ridiculously talented that he's bound to strike gold for me eventually. So, okay, check this out if you're curious. In the meantime, well, we'll see what happens. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here. I really don't know how anyone's gonna think about this album, so please vote on the poll up here. I really want to know where you guys fall on this, whether or not the shift away from hip-hop is that divisive. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get more involved into the suggestions and my scheduling process, there's the Patreon link right over there, where at 3 times a week you guys get to vote on what albums go up and down the schedule, and on the Saturdays you get the opportunity to add albums to that schedule. You got more details? The link's right over there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.